Is it true that some local authorities are planning to increase their council tax by as much as 25%, exploiting a loophole to rip off the general public? Because that's, at least according to the Daily Mail, and I think a few other outlets have said that Windsor and Maidenhead are going to increase by 25%, Hampshire by 15%, North Somerset by 15%, Bradford by 15%, etc. Or, according to the official government blog here, is that just speculative media coverage? The bit in pink. It says there's been speculative media coverage that councils will be able to increase the council tax above the 5% threshold. So in this video, I'll dive a little bit into what that threshold is, why there's a threshold, what they're supposed to do, how much it's supposed to go up by, if at all, and if they really can exploit any kind of loophole and what that loophole is. Because, of course, we wouldn't want this to go through quietly without the general public knowing about it. So to that end, I would implore you to share this video far and wide with as many people as you can. Subscribe to the channel, hit all the buttons. That helps YouTube to promote this video and spread it to a wider audience, for the simple reason that I am here to smash down these barriers of law and regulations and nonsense that generally hides the truth from you guys, the general viewer. So please do subscribe, and we'll all be better informed, because otherwise these things have their way of sneaking through quietly and they just get away with it. Let's be honest, let's put it bluntly. They get away with it, and we don't want them to get away with that now, do we? So let's go way back. So what they're talking about here, and it's a reactionary, I think it's a reactionary vlog. I say that not knowing the date of when it's published, but it may have been that before November there were news publications about the potential increase in council taxes, and we'll look at whether that's really justified and whether it's really going to work or whether it's unfair in a little moment. But it's also popped back into the news just recently with the Daily Mail saying 4 million households face council tax rises of up to 5 times the legal limit from April. Now, as one law student emailed me overnight, asked rather, how is it that they can increase up to 5 times over the legal limit? If there's a legal limit, surely they can't go beyond the limit, because a limit should be a limit. And that's a very fair question. But there is, unfortunately, an answer, which I'm going to go through in a minute. And it goes through to this government, you may have guessed. But this again explains why there is a direct overlap between the law and the government and politics and who's making these decisions, etc. And that's why it's all the more important to talk about them, explain them, and understand them. Now, the Daily Mail refers to bankrupt local authorities. Now, technically speaking, they can't fully declare bankruptcy. It's just, we don't allow our local authorities to be bankrupt, because by default, by definition, if they are bankrupt, then it's, think of it as a business. If a big business is bankrupt, that's it. It's out of business. Now, we can't allow our local authorities to be out of local authority, out of business as such. We can't allow that. What they do is issue a Section 114 notice, which is effectively the same thing. It's effectively to say, well, we can't afford to continue anymore. Therefore, we need help. Otherwise, we can't do anything, is effectively what that notice says. There's a few real implications of that. They have to have a meeting. They have to cut all new spending. They have to reevaluate their spending. They have to look at potentially increases in various council tax. And there's a number of little loopholes which they might be able to get around this. And there's a few that you, again, sneaking them through, you probably won't be aware of it. And there's not a lot you can do about it unless you make your voices heard and known. And by being aware of it, i.e. through my videos, you'll be better equipped to go to your MPs and councils and say, hey, we don't want this to happen. This can't happen, and make your voices heard. So let's get into it. So as I said, the Daily Mail referred to a number of places where these increases are likely. Now, starting at the beginning here with the what I think is a preemptive or reactive response, I'm not sure which, from government blog here, saying, following the publication of the policy statement way back then, there's been speculative media coverage, and we'll look at how speculative that is in a moment. He says, tongue-in-cheek with a cynical view, being the lawyer that I am, a speculative media coverage that councils will be able to increase council tax above the 5% threshold. Now, as a standard, there's 2 thresholds. One is the standard increase, which is 3% of the previous budget, and an extra 2% if there's sort of social care spending, etc. So an overall cap of 5%. They say here, as you might expect them to say, the government is committed to keeping taxes on working people as low as possible. I mean, I consider myself a working person, but according to Keir Starmer and various other statements made, I'm not a working person because I own other property that I let out. So apparently I'm not a working person, but I spend many of my hours working, so I don't see how I'm not a working person, but nonetheless, we digress. The government is committed to keeping taxes on working people as low as possible and will not increase the main 5% council tax threshold, referendum threshold. Now, what that referendum threshold is, if we go to this research briefing, you see if you do dig around in the parliamentary websites and archives and so on, there's a lot of guidance documents. I bring this on screen to highlight it to you so you can go and see it. Let me zoom out a bit. So council tax, local referendums, this explains quite clearly. Any authority that is proposing an excessive increase in council tax must hold a local referendum and obtain a yes vote before implementing the increase. An authority proposing an excessive increase must also make substitute calculations based on non-excessive council tax levels. This is implemented if the excess increase is rejected in the referendum. In English, it means if they want to increase council tax by more than 5%, they need to hold a referendum, a vote of the local community, for you to say yes or no. It gives you the option to say, actually, no, I don't want this council tax to increase more than 5%. Thank you very much. However, bring in the loophole, because when we come back here, this goes on. While it is for local authorities to decide what level they set the council tax, the previous policy of 3% core and 2% for the additional adult social care responsibilities, in line with the OBR forecasting, will be maintained. As it is always the case, there's variations in the flexibilities proposed for different types of authorities, reflecting their circumstances. Continuing the referendum threshold means that voters have the final say over excessive council tax increases. But does it really? Because it goes on. The policy statement published yesterday, the 28th of November, sets out, as with previous years, where a council, now here's the real key here, where a council is in need of exceptional financial support, sees additional council tax increase as critical to maintaining their financial sustainability, the government will continue to consider requests for bespoke referendum principles. That's a fancy way of saying they'll overlook whether you need to have a referendum, and they will potentially give permission for the local authority to increase beyond that standard 5%. In other words, ignore what you really want as a local community. Local proposals will be considered on a case-by-case basis, and the impact on working people will be at the forefront of the minister's consideration. I'm sure they will. But if we break that down, what they're really saying is, we'll look at a local authority's request to go beyond this limit, insisting that they've got working people's interests at heart, but ultimately allow them to charge you more council tax, which in most of these cases has been seen to be, it doesn't say on this little chart here, between £400 and £500 in many cases per year extra that you weren't paying before. Hard to see how that is in the interest of working people. We'll come back to working people in a moment because that's really important. Local referendums, this goes on. Full details of the referendum principles for different types of local authority are set out in the policy statement, following consultation, etc. If a local authority sets council tax increase above the referendum threshold, it must have it approved in a referendum of local voters by the Thursday in May. If it's lost, the authority must lower the council tax, etc. But bearing in mind that it's going to, on a case-by-case basis, consider whether it has a bespoke referendum principle. It's, again, another way of saying they might ignore that referendum principle. And this good old rhetoric here, fixing the foundations, the government remains committed to getting councils back on their feet. And we'll look at whether that's really feasible in a moment, which is why the budget confirmed total real terms increase in core spending of around 3.2%, etc., and more broadly set out in the policy statement. So now, coming to one or two examples of different things. I will use Windsor and Maidenhead as the example for this request for a bespoke consideration of the referendum principles. In English, they are asking for permission to not have to ask whether you as a local community want this council tax increase. They are going straight to government to say, we need this extra money. We need to be able to charge our constituents this extra money. So again, these go through quietly, unless you take an interest or unless you take the slightly easier approach of watching my channel to get updated on these things, and then are encouraged to look it up for your local area. So using this example, they say, recognizing the level of support needed to undo years of cuts and underfunding. Now, this is not to say that there haven't been years of cuts and underfunding and so on. That's not the point here. The point is very much whether they can just override what you wish as a community and go for this increase. And that the council is on the brink of effective bankruptcy. The draft budget also addresses recommendations by external reviews, etc. And in a nutshell then says, the draft budget includes the council's exceptional financial support request to government for a £60 million loan, alongside being able to raise council tax by an additional 20% above the current limit of 4.99%, reflecting the levels of support needed to make the council sustainable, rectify £30 million of historical accountancy errors. He takes a deep breath in whilst he digests that statement. They want to increase the council tax. This will take a moment to really come across fully. They want to increase the council tax by 25 or 24.99%, and in addition to a £60 million loan to not just reflect the level of support needed, but to make the council sustainable, and rectify £30 million worth of historical accountancy errors. If the council is unable to secure the level of support required from government, we will issue a 114 notice, which means the council is effectively bankrupt. So it's going to government to say, we need £60 million. We want to increase council tax by 25%. Otherwise, we're effectively bankrupt. So the news headlines are right in that these local authorities are threatening effective bankruptcy. It's not really legally, technically bankruptcy, but effective bankruptcy to the government if they don't agree to these terms. It sounds a little bit like a bit of a threat to me, but by the by, who am I to say? This goes on to say it could be an increase of up to £320 for the council element of bills. They say it will rectify historical issues, etc. Some of the pressure due to the council's financial position being negatively impacted by some of the historic accountancy errors going back to 2021 that must be rectified. So, putting it very simply, they want additional money from their constituents to rectify mistakes that they've made. So they want to charge you more for having made mistakes. That sounds a lot like sort of rewarding mistakes to me. But they're effectively bankrupt, they say otherwise. To help rectify these historic budget issues, rebuild capacity for frontline services, and respond to an increase in demand-led pressures in children's and adult social care and housing services, the draft budget includes proposed increases spending on adult social care. They need £6.6 million extra to meet the needs of the services to retain permanent staff for adult social care. For children's services, to meet the rising demand and costs of care placements, so children taken into care. Housing and temporary accommodation, an additional £1.7 million to meet the rising demand and costs. I will make the rather assumptive and presumptive guess here and say that the temporary accommodation is possibly for asylum seekers and illegal migrants. Housing and temporary accommodation, an additional £1.7 million and this is just for the 1 year, to meet the rising demand of costs. Neighbourhood services, reinstating £3.4 million of maintenance budgets for trees, street lighting, lampposts, etc. And then blames it on the previous government, the horror show we've inherited, which may or may not be true. I'm not an expert in that area. But that's an overview of what they want. They want £60 million loan, they want 25, and I'm sorry to Maidenhead and its councillors here for picking you. I didn't pick you deliberately, it's just one on the list. They want a £60 million loan alongside permission to increase council tax by 25%. At least £30 million of which is to resolve historical accountancy errors. Now, just to be clear, the people that are currently working there may not be the people that have made those mistakes, so it'll be potentially unfair to blame them directly for needing to rectify others' historical mistakes, but nonetheless the money is there, paid for by the constituents to rectify the mistakes made by the council that's taking the money. It sounds a little bit bizarre to me, but that's what it is. Now, bearing in mind that local authorities have been effectively bailed out by government when they've declared 114 notices all over the place and caused serious problems. But let's take another example. Let's leave Maidenhead alone now. Let's look at Bradford, and let's look at the economic contribution within the area as against the requests for council tax increases. Reminding ourselves that Bradford is on this list. I'll not go through their draft budget. I've done that for Maidenhead, but Bradford is on this list at looking for an increase of 15%. I will caveat that I just trust that this research has been done here. I always look things up, but it's probably right that they're looking for 15% increase. Let's look at and contrast that with the economic activity of the residents of Bradford. So bearing in mind they want a 15% increase in council tax, presumably for broadly the same reasons. I won't go through those or look that document up, but let's look at the contrast here. So unemployment in Bradford. Most recent unemployment figures for December 24 were published on the Office for National Statistics on the 21st of January, so literally 6 days ago at the time of recording. Their data shows 27,680 people claiming unemployment benefit in December 2024, a rate of 8.2%. Bearing in mind that is more than double, about double the national average. 5,000 odd were aged between 18 and 24, 5,500 50 and above. It says Bradford has the highest unemployment rate in Leeds. Most have small increases in their claimant rates in the last month. And if we now look at the economic inactivity in Bradford, which is a subtly different statistic, almost 25% of Bradford are people who are neither employed nor seeking work, subtly different from an unemployment rate of 5%. So at the same time, we have this issue here of local authorities looking to increase council tax by from about 8% up to 25% in different areas. But at the same time, they're looking for money to fix things that really are no fault of the inhabitants, or in some areas, no fault of the people that are working and therefore bringing in income in order to pay that council tax. And then it is going to support others, presumptively those in temporary accommodation or those that are not economically active, not working, not employed in any sense. So this all seems a bit unfair. But even if that's just how it is, you're working, your income and then your taxes go to support others who are not working, etc. Even if that's just how it is, that still doesn't overcome the fact that it is true that this policy statement published in November says that where a council is in need of exceptional financial support, they will continue to consider requests for bespoke referendum principles on a case-by-case basis. And in the example I looked at, this one here, they set out quite clearly that they are looking for a 25% increase. So there it is. That is how effectively it's not really a loophole. It's a bit of a get out of jail free card, essentially. It's if they know that they will get a no from local constituents by saying, please, may we increase the council tax by 25%. I'm quite sure most of you would say no. A few of you might say yes, granted. Some of you are like that, but I suppose most people would say no. And so I suppose the local authority knows that they would get a no in response to that referendum. So to circumvent that, they go straight to government, and none other than Angela Rayner, as Minister for Housing, I dare say will probably say yes to most of these. That's my guess. I'll be happily proven wrong, I suppose, but my guess is that she'll say yes to the vast majority of these requests. But that's what we'll see as the news develops. So there's an answer to the question that many of you had. Is this real? Is it nonsense? Is it really a loophole? How are they doing it? And is it justified? It's all there in law. It's the Local Government Finance Act says that it's all, where it's deemed to be, whether there's a determination whether it's excessive or not, the basic amount, etc. It's all done and decided, must be decided in accordance with a set of principles determined by the Secretary of State for the year. So it's down to the government. And this is set out in the Local Government Finance Act 1992, which incidentally also sets out who is liable for council tax, which is liability to council tax, section 6, persons liable to pay council tax, and there's a hierarchy of who is liable to pay it. So it's all there in the Act, and ultimately the buck goes back to government and they can decide. So as I say, this will go through quietly unless this is spread wide and fast. So please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with somebody, share it on social media, and as always, thank you for watching.